So I want to welcome everybody to the Mylio Photos Coffee Break. My name is Angela Andrieux. I think I've met most everybody here. But for those who are possibly watching the recording, I'm a product evangelist for Mylio Photos, which means I work with a lot of the documentation and education. And my goal is to help you be successful with the software. So what we're going to do today is talk about non-destructive editing in Mylio Photos and what that means and how you can do it on both your computer and on mobile devices. So we're going to have a little bit of fun. And hopefully it's going to be an easy and accessible session for everybody. So let me start by sharing my screen. And I'm going to bring up Mylio on my computer, but we're actually going to do our first bit of editing on my phone. So let me also share that screen here, get that running. Give it just a second here. And if you have any questions as we're going through, my colleague Lori here is joining us, and she's going to be answering questions in the chat. And if you see, Lori, something in the chat that you think I would want to answer live, feel free to interrupt me. This is always a very informal kind of gathering. So if you have questions as we're going through, just unmute and ask. I'm happy to answer live questions. All right. So you'll see I have up on the screen, this is my iPhone. And then I have Mylio Photos right behind it here on my computer. So you can see I'm looking at the albums view in both devices. So what I'm going to do is start by doing some editing on my iPhone and show you how easy it is to make your pictures look at their best on the go. So I'm going to go into my non-destructive edits album here, and I'm going to choose this picture that I captured with my iPhone this last weekend. I was at the Goldfield mining town, which is outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Kind of a tourist trap kind of place, but fun nonetheless. And some old rusty things to photograph, which are always great. And I found this old typewriter, and it was sitting outside. It was very, very, very poor shape, but great photographic subject. And I figured it would look really good with kind of an antique look. So that's what I did. And I did this all inside of Mylio. So what I'm going to do is tap on the edit icon there in the bottom, which looks like the little sliders. And I'm going to actually reset this and show you how I did it. And so this is the beauty of non-destructive editing, is your original photo, as you captured it, is preserved. When you edit in Mylio Photos, those edits are saved in the XMP metadata. It's not physically applied to your original image. So that original image is always protected and always safe. All of those edits, you can experiment to your heart's content. And if you don't like it, you can always revert back to the original, no problem at all. So let's have a little bit of fun. I'm going to start by going into the presets, and I'm going to choose an antique look. And I think that gets me kind of going in the right direction, but there's a few things I can do to make this look better. So I'm going to click done on the presets and then go into the sliders and make a few manual adjustments. So let's start with the exposure and darken that down a little bit. Not too much, right about there I think is good. Click done. We'll go to our contrast. We'll bring that up a little bit. And what this does is it creates separation between the light and dark areas. So I'm going to bring that up nice and high and click done. The blacks I think are good. Whites I think are pretty good. Shadows, I don't see any real blocked up shadows. And when I say blocked up shadows, that means areas that have gone completely black where you've lost detail. And the areas that's a problem is where you have detail that you want to show. So if something in your subject has those blocked up shadows, you might want to go into your shadows and just bring those up a little bit. For this, I'm going to go here to my whites though, and I am going to back that off a little bit. And you'll see that that's bringing back a little bit of detail in those brightest areas. Go ahead and click done. And I think that's looking pretty good. We might even go to highlights and back that off just a tiny bit. And you'll see that's given a little bit more balance to the entire image. So from there, what we can do is go to the next section, which is our colors. The colors I think are great. The preset that we chose made some really nice antique look colors. So I'm going to leave that alone. The next section has to do with details. And I really love clarity. So clarity is a different kind of contrast, and it really hits those mid-tone areas. So if you're looking at a histogram, that graph that you see next to some pictures, and we can see it on the desktop version, we'll look at that in just a minute. The midtones are going to be kind of that middle section of that graph. So not the brightest areas, not the darkest areas, but those middle areas in the image. And it's going to create additional contrast, which gives the appearance of detail. So you'll see as I'm bringing that up, We're getting a lot more detail here in the bottom, right down here on the keys. Everything starts to look a little bit more gritty, which is a look that I love for old rusty subjects. So I'm going to click done on that. And then I'm going to go into sharpen. Now, when you're using sharpening, what I recommend is zooming in to about 100% on an image, because that's going to really show you what sharpening is doing. If you apply sharpening looking at it zoomed out, you can add a lot of sharpening and you're not going to really notice the difference until you look at the detail. And that can lead to some unintentional artifacts or some things around the edges that just don't look quite natural. So zooming in lets you get a better idea of what's happening to the image. So from here, we can grab that slider and just move that up. And you see, as I move it up, it starts to look kind of unreal. You see kind of a white line, jagged line appearing here along some of the edges. That's an artifact from over sharpening. So I went too far. I'm going to want to back that off and bring that down to a more reasonable amount. So we get a little bit of that detail, but it's not quite so cartoonish. And then I can click done and click done on my edits, zoom back out, and there's my finished image. So what I can do there is click on the eyeball, and that's going to show me the before. Actually, no, that's the red eye removal, excuse me. I don't think there's a before and after on the mobile app, but I'm going to click done on there. And let me go ahead. I'm going to move this off the screen here for a moment, and we can take a look at it here on the computer. Here's our edit already brought over from the iPhone. So that's one of those awesome things about Mylio Photos is I can sit here and edit on my phone. Those edits are automatically transferred to my computer. I can see them here in the edit tab. And if I want to, I can take a look here at the before and the after. So that's one of those really cool things you can do. And if I decide that I want to do something else with this picture, all I need to do is click the reset button here. Or if I'm on my phone, let me go ahead and grab that. Let's see, I've got a few overlapping windows here. I can go back into my edit here in the bottom of the screen and just click reset down here in the bottom left and get rid of those edits. Now you'll notice that the colors are looking a little bit different between what's showing from my phone and what's showing on the computer. And I just want to let you know that that actually is not what it looks like in real life. So if I go ahead and turn this around, I'm not sure you can see it there on the screen. The colors are actually much more accurate than what's coming through on the screen share for the iPhone. And so what's on my iPhone in real life matches really well what's on my screen, but for some reason the screen share is a little bit red, but that's not really the way it's looking in real life. So that gives you an idea of some of the things you can do while you're on the go with your pictures. Even if you don't have the original downloaded to your phone, you can do all of these wonderful edits. Those edits are saved to your metadata, transferred back to your computers, to your vaults, and will appear in Mylio Photos on all of your devices. It's super quick and seamless and a lot of fun. So let's do a couple more edits on the desktop version, and I'll show you some of the fun things we can do there. Let me go ahead and stop mirroring that and jump to another image. Looks like we have some questions in the chat here. Everybody doing good?
Yeah, Pamela has a question about the differences between whites and highlights and blacks and shadows.
That's a very good question. So while we have this image up, let's open up the histogram and take a look at this graph. So when we were talking about clarity, we were talking about those midtone sections because that's going to be kind of this middle part of the graph. When we're talking about shadows and highlights, that's going to be kind of the bottom quarter and top quarter of the graph. And when we're talking about blacks and whites, that's going to be the absolute farthest right and left part of the graph. So it's all a spectrum of all of those different shades. And it's just a matter of which portion of that entire spectrum that you want to target. So going after highlights as opposed to whites is going to hit a wider range of tones. Whereas if you go after just whites, it's just going to affect those very, very brightest points in the image. And same for the highlights. Blacks is going to hit those very, very darkest points of the image. Shadows is going to give you a little bit wider band and affect a few more areas of tone, getting up closer towards those midtones. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of an esoteric concept until you see it in action. So let's actually just play with this here for a minute with this image. So when we look at our tone controls here, exposure hits everything. That's going to affect the entire graph. You can see as I move it to the left, the graph slams to the left, the entire image gets very dark. I bring that up towards the right, the entire graph slams to the right and gets very bright. If you ever want to reset something, you can always double click on the exposure slider and it'll take it back to the default setting. And then we have our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So let's go ahead and move this highlights around. You'll see that it's affecting the bright areas, but it's also affecting some of those not as bright areas as well. Whereas if we go after the whites, it's really just targeting those absolute brightest areas. So it's just a wider band of those tones. Same with our shadows. It's going to affect all of those areas underneath where there's some detail, but they are pretty dark. And then if we go after the blacks, it's going to make those blackest areas really, really dark, and we're going to start to lose detail in those areas. So Pamela, I hope that helps give you a visual representation of what all of that means. And there's no one right way to do this. What you're going to want to do as you're developing your own style is pick what works well for you. So some people might say you need to have this exact balance. Your histogram has to look a certain way. We don't appreciate art based on what the graph looks like. So you make it what you like. And for me, that's typically balanced, but I like to have nice detail and nice contrast, which means it's okay if some areas are perfectly white and some areas are perfectly black. You just want to make sure you have detail in the areas where your subject and the most important parts of the image are. The rest of it, much less important. All right, so let's play with another image here. This is one that I captured in Little Italy here in San Diego. I was out photographing with a friend and we were running out into the street. Not smart, I don't recommend it. But we wanted to capture the Little Italy sign. And I think I had held down the shutter as I was running back because there was a car coming. So this was kind of a fail, but it's a fail that I actually really like. So let me show you what the original looks like. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. And you'll see that it's not nearly as vibrant or as rich. So I want to go ahead and make a few edits here to make this look better and kind of give it that bit of artistic look that I enjoy. So first thing we're going to do here is crop it. I'm going to grab the crop tool and we're going to straighten this up a bit. And you can use the slider along the bottom just to make things, get those angles right where you want them. And then I'm really a fan of a 16:9 crop. I think it just brings the eye in. There's a lot of empty space up here at the top that's not really all that interesting. What's really interesting here in this image is happening down here. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that crop and say done. And then we can go ahead and apply a preset if we like, or we can go down and just start working with our sliders. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the sliders here, and I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit. I'm going to bring the contrast way up, and you'll see that that's creating separation between the brightest and darkest areas. That's where we're starting to get some of that richness. We can adjust our highlights, bring back our highlights a little bit. That's going to bring in some of the colors that are in those brightest areas. Shadows, I'm going to keep that right about where it is. I could darken down the shadows a little bit more and give that a little bit more contrast, but I don't want to lose too much detail. Whites, I'm going to leave alone. Blacks, I'm going to go ahead and make a little bit more rich, make those darker, just make that contrast really pop. And then I love clarity. It just gives some great detail. So you'll see as I bring that to the right, all these little lines become a little bit more defined. All right. Whoops, did not mean to switch pictures. There we go. So now let's go ahead and play with the color a little bit. The colors in this image are a lot of fun. And I think that's what, kind of gives it that really neat effect. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the vibrance up to the right. And the difference between vibrance and saturation is really about how heavy of a touch do you want to use. Vibrance is going to target the less saturated colors in an image, where saturation is going to target every pixel in the image. So a lot of times I'm going to like the results I get better from vibrance, but saturation can also be helpful. Just keep in mind, it's going to be a lot more punch to your image, and it may put it over the edge really easily. So there we go. That's looking pretty fun. Let me go ahead and scroll down here to the bottom, and I'm going to add just a touch of sharpening. Now let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at those details again. If I pull that sharpening up really high to the right, you'll see that things start to get a little bit cartoonish on the edges. So I'm going to just bring that back down to a more neutral space. And I think that looks pretty good. We can zoom back out and take a look at our before and our after. That's a pretty big change. Now, the only other thing that I want to do to this image is I want to downplay this sign up here. The sign's annoying. It kind of detracts and pulls your eye right up to the edge of the corner. So as a matter of composition, you want to pay attention to your edges because your eye is going to go towards distractions at the edge. It's also going to go to the brightest points in an image. And when you have a bright point right on the edge, it takes your eye and it takes you right out of the photo. So what I want to do is actually grab our brush and I'm going to scroll back up to our tone controls. And I've got my exposure here down pretty low, and I can just brush in here on the sign and tone that down. We don't have an erase tool to go in there and physically erase the sign, but we can darken it down and make it so it's not dragging our eye out of the frame, and we can stay focused on all of these bright, wonderful lights here in the middle. So once you're done with that, you can go ahead and click on the brush again to turn that off. And again, take a look at your before and after. And there we go. So I've taken my fail image and just made it really fun. And like I said, it's one of my favorite shots from the night, even though it wasn't exactly what I was going for. All right, any questions? Let's see here. So it looks like John says, question on undo, redo edits. I can ask live when there's a pause. John, do you want to go ahead and tell me a little bit more about what you've got in mind?
Yes, thank you. I usually start off with a crop as I'm editing the photos, and there's a done button on there. That's great. Okay. And then I start, with some of the sliders and so forth. And occasionally I find, I've gone too far with one, but I may have done 5 or 6 sliders down. And then then it looks like the only option I have is to kind of undo all of them. Is that correct? There's no sort of.
So if you're going down the list,
somewhere in the middle.
What you can do on any of these sliders is you can just double click the handle and reset it. And that'll take it back to the default setting.
I see. Okay. That's great. That's very handy. I didn't know that.
And
Perfect.
you also have your undo and redo. So if I do Command or Control Z, I can undo those things that I just did. And it's going to step back.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's going to take you one step back. But if you want to just go back, if you've already done 5 or 6 things and you just want to reset that one slider, just double click on the handle. It'll put it back to the default.
Well, perfect. Okay, thank you. One other question then, Angela, in here is either on the order. So you looks like you kind of step all the way through one at a time down the list. Yes. That's normal. Your normal workflow.
It is. I work on the tone first, then I start taking into consideration the color and the detail, and then I start looking at things that, okay, is this a distraction? Do I need to get rid of this? Things like that. Yeah.
All right.
That's not necessarily a have to, though. You can go in any order that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and sometimes I have done that, right? I've also seen, I don't know if it was you or certainly I've seen JC, turn on the clipping, the white and the black points, and start processing that way if they're really, high at one point or the other.
Yep. So you can see in this image, I actually have my shadows and my highlights are quite locked up. But that was really the look I was going for because I wanted to emphasize all of those lights. So there's not really one right way to do that. But I am losing a lot of detail in my shadows and highlights in this particular image. If we go to one like the typewriter here and take a look at that, you can see we lost some detail in those areas that are marked blue. And what I'm doing is clicking this little dot here on the left and the right of the histogram. And that's going to show you where you're starting to lose detail in those brightest and darkest areas.
Right. But you don't have to start there.
Nope.
Okay.
It's really a personal preference. And I found that if I key in too much on this particular technical aspect, when I unclick those and I look at the image as a whole, to me, it tends to look a little bit flat. And I end up going back in and adding more contrast, bringing back in a little bit more of the whites and the blacks, because to me, it looks better.
Okay, I see. Great.
But it's, it's all personal taste.
And then a final question. Are you going to cover curves?
I can touch into curves. I wasn't going to go too much into that today. You mean the levels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can touch on that today. That's that tool can be used on any image, absolutely. Where it really comes in handy is when you're doing retouching on older scan photos. So we can do a separate session on that another day.
Perfect. Great.
But yeah, we can play with that a little bit today.
Thank you.
And then it looks like Pamela wants to know a little bit more about the brush controls. Well, let's jump into that really quick and look at our brushes. So what you have here is you can choose the radius of your brush, which is going to be that size, and that's going to make your brush bigger or smaller. You can see there in the middle of the screen, it's making the brush big or small. So you have that particular control. And you can also show a brush overlay, which if you've made brush strokes, it's going to paint in and show you where you've brushed. Once you want to see what the effect is without that, you can go ahead and go in here and turn that off. So I can see that I painted in a really dark area right over that key. Now, any brush stroke that I've made, what I can do is go to any of these sliders and make adjustments in just that area. So let's say I want to make that one a little bit brighter. We want to bring the clarity up a little bit higher, but maybe bring the whites down. So it just makes that one key kind of stand out. It's just a way to give targeted adjustments to specific areas. There's not a lot of complexity in our brush tool. It's a very basic brush, but it does allow you to do some level of customization in certain areas of your image. So I hope that answers your question. All right, perfect. And it looks like Lori shared a link to the manual on that one, so appreciate that, Lori. All right, let's go ahead and do one more image, and let's play with this one. We'll do a little bit of curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset this image, and this was taken down on the waterfront in Coronado, which is an island, well, kind of quasi-island off the coast of San Diego and across the harbor. I'm going to crop this really quick. So I'm going to grab that crop tool, and I'm going to straighten this out ever so much. It feels a little bit crooked. There we go. That's better. And again, with having a bright spot on the edge of the image, the lights on the boathouse out here are just a little bit distracting. So I'm going to grab that and pull in that side and get rid of that. And now we have an image where it really draws us into the boats, and it's not taking our eye straight out of the image. So from there, I'm going to click done. And then let's start with auto color. So the auto color preset is the same as going down to levels and clicking auto. And you'll notice it just subtly changes the color balance in the image. And that's working off of the red, green, and blue channels. So what that auto color is doing is it's taking each one of these channels, moving these sliders in so that it matches where the graph begins. So it's just giving you a little bit better, truer color on that particular image. From there, what you can do is you can adjust each one of these, or the luminance, which is the brightness, to get a different look to your image. So I'm pulling this in from the right, and that's going to move my entire graph over and make this a little bit brighter. I can then even adjust these midtones and, let's say, brighten up those midtones a bit. All right. And then I can target specific colors. So let's say I want to bring down the blues. If I bring this in, you'll see this is making the image more blue. And if I pull that to the right, it's starting to get a little bit more green, yellow. And if we pull this in from the left, we're bringing in more greens and yellows as well. So if you're wanting to go for kind of a vintage look, this lets you have really granular control over how those colors are rendered in your image. And you can play with these and have a lot of fun and get some very unique looks. If you don't like what you've done here manually, you can again click auto, and it's going to take you back to that auto setting. You can also use all of these sliders up here in conjunction with using the levels. So we can pull up that exposure. And that's looking really good in a lot of ways, but I feel like it's made some of these areas of the sky a little bit too bright. So that's where we can grab our highlights and pull that back down, and grab those whites and pull that back in. And you'll see that's giving us a lot more definition up here in the clouds in the sky. And then we have some areas here around the boats that are a little bit dark. So I'm going to grab the shadows and pull those up to the right. And you'll see that that's giving us a little bit more color and detail here in these darker areas. And then I'm going to grab that clarity slider, move that up to the right. And that's just going to give us some additional definition and detail in those midtones. And it's not really adding sharpening per se, but it adds the appearance of sharpness. It adds the appearance of details. And I just absolutely love the clarity slider. It's one of those tools that no matter which application I'm using, I almost always add it if the subject can handle it. Now, there's some subjects where you don't want to necessarily add clarity. Let's say you're doing a close-up of somebody with, soft skin. You don't really want to make them look gnarly. Or you have really smooth water that you've gone through the trouble of capturing a long exposure. You might not want to add a ton of clarity because it's going to make that water that you so purposely smoothed, it's going to give it kind of that roughness. So you want to be careful how you do that. Here we can go ahead and work with our colors. We can make that vibrance a little bit higher. And then as I look at this image, to me, it still feels a little bit too blue. So that's when I'm going to scroll back up here and go to our white balance. And on our temperature slider, you'll see here to the left, it's blue, and to the right, it's golden yellow. So I can take the slider and move it very subtly to the right and just kind of take the blue edge off of this image to where it looks a little bit more natural. And then as I look at this and I go, maybe it's a little bit green, I can just take this and very subtly, a little bit goes a long way when you're working with your white balance sliders, just move that a little bit to the right. And that even brings out a little bit of the pink in the clouds. And that really was there that day. So that makes that a much better image. So let me go down to the bottom. The last thing I want to do is add some sharpening. And not all images need to be sharpened. I'm just going to throw that out there. If you're photographing with an iPhone, chances are that camera has already added quite a bit of sharpening. And if you go into an application and add more sharpening, that's when things are going to start to look really cartoonish. With this particular image, this was a raw image from a full frame Canon camera. So there's no sharpening added to raw photos. So typically you're going to want to go ahead and add some level of sharpening just to give those edges some definition. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. And I think right about there looks good. And zoom back out. And there we go. So here's our before and our after. There's so much fun stuff we can do with the tools here in Mylio without having to go to other applications. Now, if you really want to get into creative editing, you always have the option to go up here to the photo menu and choose open with and open this into another application. And there's tons of great ones out there. I love Photoshop. I love Luminar. I love Topaz apps. There's so many great ones out there that you can work with, but you don't have to. You can get so much of what you need to do done here. And especially if you're looking for something quick, you just want to make the image look better and then get that sent off and shared with your friends and family. This is a great way to do it. And keep in mind that these edits, not set in stone. They're completely non-destructive and you can revert them and get rid of them at any time if you want to try something different. So feel free to explore. All right. So Pamela asked the difference between temperature and tint. It looks like Lori answered that in the chat, but let me go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So when you're looking at the color of light, and as you work with photography more, this is something you're going to notice as you look at lighting. You can notice it very strongly, like at the end of the day when street lamps come on. Sometimes they have a blue tint to them. Sometimes they have a yellow tint to them. And then if you're looking at fluorescent lights, a lot of times there's a green or a pink tint to them. And as you kind of key into that as a photographer, you're going to start seeing that light everywhere. And it's going to make a little bit more sense. But what we're talking about is the temperature of the light. So usually on cloudy days, wintry days, the light is more blue. And so that slider will naturally be over here more towards the left. On a bright sunny day, it's going to be a little bit warmer. And depending on what kind of lighting you're using, like a lot of incandescent lights can be very warm. So you can adjust this to make it look more natural, because sometimes artificial lighting or even the daytime lighting and the settings in your camera might not be quite right. And you just want to balance it out to make it look more natural, or you can use it as a creative effect. So the temperature and tint, or the temperature, moves on a spectrum between blues and yellows. And so you can adjust that to the point that looks natural to you. And again, if you want to make this look like a really moody day, go ahead and move that a little bit more to the left, pull that exposure down a little bit, and you can make it look like it's kind of a moody, gray, dreary day. Conversely, if you want to make it look like it's a brighter, warmer day, you can move that to the right and bring in some more of that warm light, and it just changes the look and feel of an image. Now your tint goes from green to pink. And these are finer adjustments so you can bring in different tones in your image. So if you want to go kind of turquoise, you can bring that down to the left. And if you want to bring out some really nice colors in a sunset, sometimes nudging the tint slider to the right to bring out some more of those pinks can really make a really nice difference. Let's see here. Does Mylio separately store the edits to the photos to the originals themselves? So these are completely non-destructive. They are not affecting your original in any way. Let me go ahead and I'm going to right click on this image and say show in Finder. And here's my CR3. You can see it's completely unchanged. Nothing has been done to this original raw image. These edits are actually being stored in the XMP file here. And Mylio then reads those. And when it sees that in the XMP, it will apply what we see in the application, but it's not actually changing your original file. And that's what allows us to go back, revert back to that original image anytime. All right, any other questions? All right. Well, that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, now is a great time to unmute and ask. Let me go ahead and I'm going to back this off a little bit. That's too pink for me. And also a little bit too warm.
Hi there, Angela.
Hello.
I did put a wee message in there about finding my first. Incidentally, I bought one of those fast photos that you machines the other day that you talked about.
Awesome.
And I've started to scan hundreds of family photos and have a look at looking at doing more. But I did find one of my first black and white photos from 1976, and it's not looking too flash and has a big sun flare. Obviously, I took it looking into the sun without knowing back then when I was only a young lad. Anyhow, I tried to edit it and to enhance some of the detail, and I just failed. And I wonder if you had any tips for editing a black and white, a very old black and white film photo that you've digitized.
That's a great question. What I would encourage you to do is to post that into our scanning subgroup there in our community.
Okay.
And I can take a look at it and give
sure.
you some specific guidance.
Thank you.
Depending on the picture, your whites, blacks, and your clarity are going to be your friends.
Yes.
And if the scan is a little bit discolored, let's say it was a black and white, but then it's maybe yellowed a little bit over the years, you can always just do a black and white conversion here as well.
Yes.
And that's just going to pull any residual saturation from its age out of the picture. But yeah, go ahead and post it and I'll take a look and let you know what I would do with it.
Sorry, can you just tell me again what the name of that thread is, or the group that I need to send it to?
Let me go ahead and show you really quick. If you go up to our help menu and go to community.
Yes.
Let me go ahead and pull that window over here. And scroll down to our groups. We have one down here for family history and scan photos.
Yes.
And if you're not already a member, you can join it. You can join as many of these as you like.
I have joined a couple. Thank you. I do know what you mean now. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead and join it, post it there. If you want to tag me, I keep an eye on these anyway, so you don't have to tag me, I'll see it.
That's okay. That one just a couple above said black and white photos. Is that possibly where I should put it?
You can put it in black and white as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Either one, whatever makes the most sense to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yep.
You're welcome. John, you have your hand up.
And
Angela, another John. I'm curious. I assume it was my hand you were referring to, but my wife bought me a Brookstone scanner about 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm just wondering, and I've used it. I haven't used it in the last 6 months, but I've scanned hundreds of slides, 30 or 40-year-old slides. Would I be better? Should I buy a newer one since it's 10 or 15 years old, or did it have a good enough technology back then to do reasonably good scans? If I recall, I get about 400 kilobytes on a scan of a slide. I don't know if that's pathetic or not.
I mean, that's not a huge amount, but slides are pretty tiny. Let me think about that for a second.
It was at the time, it was from a fancy company, Brookstone.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was so old. It's pretty old, admittedly.
I mean, scanning technology has changed somewhat, but not as much as other things photography related. You probably can still get some good scans out of it. I would make sure that you're scanning in at least a 600 DPI.
Okay.
1200 if you have it, that's going to give you a bigger image, more pixels to work with. And see if that makes a difference.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Angela and John, can I just add something to that?
Of course.
I've been recently interested in this as well, with the scanner, of course, to find out what the best scan rate should be, or size. I found a really great article from Roots Tech, and the article talked about archival photos being always kept at 4,000 pixels along the longest edge. And that was really good. And they then translated in that how that might relate to scanning an image that's huge at 300 DPI, or a tiny wee one at maybe 1200 plus DPI. So it's a really good article to watch. It's about an hour long, but fantastic. And it describes beautifully how to do that.
Awesome. Well, if you want to share the link to that in the
Yes.
that scanning group, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I have
thank you. I
a,
will. Yeah.
I
Fantastic.
have an optic film from Plus Tech that I've scanned some slides with, and the quality is amazing. They're
Wow.
really old slides, and they have some editing tools within the software as well. But I mean, with an addition to what you have here in Mylio, I don't think you can go wrong. It's a really super high res, probably one of the best consumer scanners or prosumer scanners you can get for slides and film, I think.
Awesome. And what was that called again? That was the
It's made by Plus Tech. It's a German
Tech.
company.
okay.
and
I'm gonna
it's
have to look that
optic
up.
film.
I see that you put that in the chat. Thank you.
It's an optic film 8200i. Is the
Okay.
model. I'll
Yeah,
put
I
it
just
on
did a
the
quick
chat.
search. It popped right up. So it's
Got it?
not an inexpensive piece of equipment, but if it does a good job, that's great. And if you
Yeah,
have a
well,
lot of
if you have-
slides to scan,
Yeah, if you have a lot of slides like I do, I mean, that's pretty much all I shot back in the day. I shot concerts, all kinds of stuff. I've got, photos of musicians and just a ton of stuff that's,
Wow.
unfortunately, I got to pull out of mothballs and start scanning.
well, at least we have the equipment available to us these days to get that done.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'll have to take a closer look at that piece of machinery, because I know my grandma actually has a bunch of slides in her closet that she wants gone.
Yeah. and
She's
it's-
like,
it's
somebody needs to
super-
scan these and be done with them.
it's
I missed
super
the name of the
portable,
last
too.
suggestion for the technology. What was the name of it?
It's made by Plus Tech. Here, I'll put it in the chat real quick.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And Michael asks, is there any tips for scanning negatives? You probably want to, I haven't done much of it myself. There's brackets you can get to put into like a flatbed scanner to scan negatives, or things like the slide scanner that was just mentioned. Some of those can handle film as well if you put them into a certain bracket. A lot of times it really depends on how many you have to scan, how many you want to scan. So what we're probably going to do with my grandma's slides, which I will take a look at this piece of equipment, but it looks like it's about $500 US. Kind of weigh that against how much it's going to cost for us to send them out, how many she has. So if she has so many that it would cost us far more than $500 to outsource, we might go ahead and buy that equipment. If it's going to cost us less because she doesn't have that many, we probably will just outsource them, have them done by a professional company, and get the digital files sent back to us that way. So kind of just have to weigh it and see how much time you want to spend on it and how much money you're willing to spend on the equipment. All right. Any other questions today?
Sorry to keep piping up, but I recently saw the categories coffee break, which I found was really great. And I have been categorizing with people, and I just wondered, it didn't seem it's doable, but there isn't a lot of options in there, I found, because all the photos that I have of people seem to inherit all of the categories, and I have to manually go through and deselect the ones, or only select the ones for certain people. It seems to be maybe it's the way I'm doing it, sort of random. But
Well,
once I do it for a person, then it sticks with that person. So all new photos that are faces that are rescanned and then fall into that person inherit those ones. But yeah, is there a way of globally
well,
removing all of that?
you can assign a category based on a folder.
Yes, that's what I
And then
thought.
you can assign them
Yeah.
per image, and you can assign them per event.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah,
are the
there
only
seems to be a
options
lot
right now.
more. Yeah, there's a lot more flexibility against those things. For the people, there doesn't appear to be that same flexibility. That's what I found, because I have faces scattered across many folders. I
Let
wasn't
me
as
ask you this.
organized.
With your people, is what's your goal with using the categories for people? Because I tag my faces, and I find that to be good enough for finding my people pictures. But what is your goal with doing
Sure.
that?
So what I was wanting to do with that is I thought categories would be a good way of grouping groups of people. So
Okay.
the many groups that I'm involved in, or if it's family, I click on the family one, and then all of the faces, all of the people that pop up that are in my immediate family pop into that group. So
I
could
gotcha.
quickly at a glance say, oh, okay, yeah, there's uncle or auntie or what have you. Especially
Right.
in recent times when I've had a lot of sadly, I've had a lot of people pass, and a lot of my cousins, because they know I've got archives of photos, are asking for photos of their grandparent or their uncle or their dad. And I just found that was much easier to group them, or specialty groups that I'm a volunteer, many volunteers with many groups. So I just tried to categorize them that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're doing kind of the maximum that you can do with categories in that particular instance. But that's a great way to use it. I will say we are exploring ways to group people differently under the people categories. So I think initially it will probably be like family, friends, acquaintances.
Yes.
But we're looking into the future with possibilities of more things that are genealogically related, so be able to have relationships.
Yeah, great.
I think that's a ways down the road, but it's something that we are looking at. So
thank you, Angela. That's great. Thanks for explaining that.
You're very welcome.
Angela,
All right.
did we get to Michael's question? He was talking about his Wolverine scanner, but he was talking about that his images come out with a heavy green tint.
Oh, I didn't see the green tint. I saw the tips for scanning negatives, and my apologies. All right. So with the heavy green tint, what you can do is right here under the white balance, you can grab this tint slider and move that to the right, and it'll balance out that green tint and a lot of things. Prior to doing that, what I might do first is the auto color, which is this icon up here, or you can do it down on levels and just hit the auto on this one here. And that's going to do a lot of the correction, especially on scanned images that are discolored. Once you get there, then you can go into the green levels here, make some fine adjustments. Again, use the white balance. Those are some tools that I would use to correct those color casts. All right. Anything else that I missed? All right. Oh, one more comment just popped up. Where's the white balance? So if you're over here in the edit tools on the right and you scroll up to the top, right here is white balance, and that's where you have your temperature and your tint sliders. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and your great questions. I hope you learned a little something about the editing tools in Mylio Photos. Also want to thank Lori for helping out with the chat and being here to help out. So I want to wish you guys a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.